Bilingual people, what have you heard that you weren't supposed to? I speak English and French and I live in Quebec. Everyone knows how some French Quebecers don't take too kindly to the English. So I'm at a cafe ordering in English because I'm in between classes and screw it, it's 7:30 a.m. and latte is pretty much the same in both languages. The cashier looks at me like I had puke all over myself and walks over to her manager and says in French, "Take care of that. When will they understand that it's French in this province?" At which point I turned bright red and I said in French, "Pardon? Can I not order a coffee without having to have a political debate? Would you not serve travelers or immigrants? Free coffee for a year." Ah, yes, the classic latte is the universal language until it's not experience. Story 2. Oh, I have a good one. I'm Asian and I live in France, so my French is pretty fluent, spoken at least. I was visiting some friends in London last summer, and on the tube, there was a group of 5 French tourists standing around and pretty much whining about everyone else in the tube, saying that Brits are so ugly, judging how they're dressed, really petty crap. I was already side-eyeing the crap out of this group, but pretty much kept to myself and my friends. Then the tube started getting really crowded, and we had to move in nearer to said French group. I accidentally bumped shoulders with one of the guys in the group, and he proceeded to groan loudly, then turn to his friends and say, "All these freaking Asians, they're everywhere. Go back to China. What a witch." His group started laughing and looking at me. At that point, I saw white and completely lost it. I turned around and addressed his whole group, calling them out on their ignorance and racist BS, telling them off for being the exact stereotype of French tourists that ruin the reputations of the decent French people out there. And assuming that no one else can speak their language while traveling around in Europe, for Christ's sake, ended by saying if you don't want to see any other races or ethnicity, you should probably stay in that hole you call a home and not travel abroad if you're going to act like a massive schmuck. Everyone was looking at me at this point. My friends were like, "What the heck?" and trying to get me to stop. I just said loudly in English to everyone else that this group of French people were making racist statements and deserved to be called out. They all pretty much turned red, and one of the other people in the group mumbled a quick apology, and they got off the tube at the next stop. Story 3. I used to go to lunch with my assistant manager at a Mexican restaurant next door to where we worked. My assistant manager is Cuban and would usually have small talk in Spanish with the waiters. One day, he tells them about how he is the manager and I'm his assistant. This conversation gets more interesting when he tells the waiter about what a lousy worker I am. And this is when I interrupted to say, in Spanish, that he, my assistant, is full of crap and I let them know that I speak Spanish. The waiter laughed his back off and my assistant manager was very embarrassed. Ah yes, good times. Story 4. In high school, my dad and I went backpacking through the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California. We were in this small town named Lone Pine, which is about 4 hours north of LA. There were tons of German and French tourists there who had been visiting the redwood forests. I speak both English and French fluently, and I overheard these 2 French girls talk about me in a convenience store. One of them nodded in my direction and said, "What about that one?" To which the other one replied, "He seems kind of dumb, but he's cute, so yeah, I'd probably sleep with him." I thought I would try my luck and approach them about it. In French, I said, "So, I'd like to take you up on that offer if you're up to it." They were clearly pretty embarrassed and just walked away giggling. Story 5. U.S. citizen here. I lived in Georgia for 2 years, the country, not the state, so I have a rudimentary grasp on Georgian. I was at a hostel in Istanbul a few months ago and fell deathly ill within a few hours of arrival. I'm the only person in my 4-bedroom. I proceeded to spend the entire next day in bed, never left the room. Day 3, I'm both still ill and starving. I have a transatlantic flight the next day. Crap. For the first time, the cleaning staff came into the room, 2 women. I want to somehow get them the message that I'm sick and need an English-speaking staff member to come to the room. Unfortunately, I don't speak a word of Turkish. But then, in my half-conscious state, I hear some chatter that sounds like, "Smells bad." I see the other worker glance my way, then I hear what I'm absolutely certain is, "Yes, he smells bad." Praise Jeebus, they're Georgian, and you should have seen the look on their faces when I rolled over and blabbed, "I'm extremely sick, I need medicine from a pharmacy." I had exactly what I needed an hour later, soup on a regular basis, and fresh hot tea every 30 minutes until I left. They were awesome. Good times. Story 6. I'm bilingual, but none of my stories are good. I love a particular story from my mom, however. When my mom was in her 20s, she was in line at a mall and she heard 2 Arabic men behind her making fun of all the witch American women and talking about her. For your information, she was not dressed badly. She was even super modest by today's standards. But in Saudi, the women cover everything but their eyes. She grew up in Saudi, so she not only spoke the language, but she was very familiar with the beliefs there. She then turned around and threw them out in Arabic for disrespecting her and told them they should be ashamed for so boldly acting outside of their belief system at the expense of strangers in a country that does not have the same restrictions. Story 7. I speak fluent English and German, plus a few other languages where I can speak the basics. I was sitting in a hot tub while on vacation in California. These two German girls came a little while later and got in the hot tub. The hot tub overlooks the pool and the public beach since the hotel was on the water. I made some small chat in English when they got in and they assumed I only spoke English. So they started talking among themselves in German. They started commenting on people that would walk by with all sorts of things. I bet she has implants. He is probably her witch, etc. I was just listening and holding anything back. Then they started narrating this seagull who kept asking for scraps and were making some horrible remarks. Hey, you fat witch, you're already fat enough. Throw me some food, you fatty. They cracked a few good jokes, considering they were German humor. I still found them really funny. Before I knew it, I lost my crap and started cracking up. They knew instantly. Their faces turned bright red from shame. I just laughed even harder. I then said, thanks for the laughs. I'll leave you two. Have a good day, in perfect German. Story 8. Not me, but my girlfriend. She speaks English and Dutch. There have been numerous times that she has been in England and heard people speaking in Dutch about things you wouldn't usually talk about in public. For example, when she was on the bus, she heard guys talking behind her describing this lump he'd found on his thing, and because they'd assumed no one could understand them, they were talking at normal levels. I was next to her at the time and she told me and I burst out laughing. When we got off the bus, we turned to them and said doe, which is bye in Dutch. The look on their faces was brilliant. Story 9. Not me, but my dad. He spoke English and German. While at the zoo, when I was a kid, another father and his kid were talking. The kid asked his dad, in German, why that man, my dad, was walking with a limp. The boy's dad began answering, in German, something along the lines that it was rude to ask such questions. Good thing he didn't understand you. My dad smiled at the boy and, in German, answered, because I hurt my ankle chasing after a boy who asked rude questions. The boy's dad and my dad had a pretty good laugh. The boy looked suitably ashamed and perhaps learned a lesson. I ate ice cream. Story 10. The amount of stories that came out of Quebec are enraging at times. Sheesh, those people are more entitled than the natives. The two biggest stories that make me mad coming out of there? A guy from out west was visiting a relative in Quebec in the hospital. While there, he decided to get lunch and ordered a sandwich specifically without tomatoes. He had a severe allergy at the hospital's cafeteria. The witch behind the counter got uppity and said that he was in Quebec and he needed to speak French. He told her this was Canada or something, and she, angry at him, made his sandwich with tomatoes and threw the frickin' sandwich at him. Luckily, he was in a hospital or he may have passed away. The other involved a 911 operator. So this guy had moved to Quebec, knew some French, but wasn't fluent. His wife did, though, and while his wife wasn't home, working, I believe, and his 2-year-old daughter started to have a seizure, he phoned 911. He chose to speak in English because, again, he wasn't fluent. He didn't know how to describe what was happening. The 911 operator actually lectured him about speaking French in Quebec. If I remember correctly, the witch actually hung up on him. Story 11. Sorry, but here's a not me, but my friend kind of story. My buddy is Mongolian and Russian, speaks fluently in both, as well as English, but looks entirely Mongolian. We went to Vegas a year ago with another friend who was also Mongolian and hit the tables. They went to go play poker together. I basically just handed my wallet over to the casino. Anyway, they're at the table with 2 Russian guys who are speaking Russian to each other, basically planning on trying to play my friends and drive up the bets in an attempt to get their money. My friend hears them and understands what's happening, then tells the other friend what's up in Mongolian. So now they knew they were getting played and decided to play the Russians. Basically, they bluffed their way to winning some money until the Russians left, at which time my friend said to them in Russian, "Good playing with you guys, take care." The Russian guys' jaws dropped and they left. Story 12. Not really something I wasn't supposed to hear, but I was bringing my child to a French school. The teachers are always talking to one another in French in front of me. Then one day, a kid randomly asked me what this is a picture of. I replied, Le Boeuf, which I know because the street near my house was named that. And then all of a sudden, they stopped talking in front of me in French. They all seemed embarrassed and ashamed. Makes me wonder what they were saying before they thought I didn't speak French. Story 13. I speak primarily in English, but my family comes from a bilingual French part of the province, New Brunswick, so many of my family members communicate in French primarily. During one visit to my grandparents' house, I was looking over the shoulder of my cousin as she wrote a note to one of her friends. This would have been over 10 years ago now, if memory serves, so it wasn't very common for school-age kids to have phones and text each other. Anyway, she made no effort to hide her note from me because she didn't know I could read French. She was writing about me and my brother, writing that I was annoying. Her exact wording was, man, él es tenant, Franglish for the win, and she wrote that my brother was cute. So I proved her right in judging me annoying by abruptly shouting out, hey, I'm not that annoying, and you think my brother is cute? That's gross, he's your cousin. Priceless reaction. Story 14. In France, Paris, I was traveling with some friends, also Portuguese, and we ordered in English in that restaurant because I am the only one who understands a bit of French in the group. And since we saw other tourists talk in English, it was easier for us. And then when eating, we proceeded to talk in Portuguese. Then I hear a regular-looking French family say, damn Portuguese, they're all dirty and thieves and so poor. I bet they had to work for like 2 years just to come here. When we left, I said in the most perfect French accent I had to the father who was like 30 years old, I was 17 at the time, well, at least Portugal isn't known for surrendering and being rude. Do you want to repeat all you said about my country outside, one-on-one? You should have seen his face. I did not know French people thought of us like that. Seriously, it left me wondering what the heck did we, Portuguese people, do to be seen like that. Yeah, I imagine the French family's faces went from smug superiority to, did we just accidentally insult a multilingual, potentially pugilistic teenager in zero point 0.2 seconds? Well done. Story 15. Ooh, the fun I've had being able to speak Indonesian. My family and I, like most Australians, go to Bali and Indonesia quite a lot. I learned the language for 12 years and was fluent enough to pass tertiary entrance exams. The Indonesians just aren't used to tourists making much of an effort to speak their language, so as a consequence, they say a lot. My two favorite moments would be from my first trip. We were being driven from our hotel to a really popular restaurant. We were being driven by 3 young guys. They were happily chatting away, blissfully unaware that I understood every word. One of them made a joke about taking my mother home. They were very much just cracking a joke, no real ill intent. And when they all laughed, I laughed really loudly. They stopped immediately and said in Indo, how long have you been learning Indonesian? It was a pretty quiet car ride after that. The other time would be at the markets. I was buying some crappy jewelry from a small stall by the side of the road, and I made a point of bartering in English for a change. In the middle of our transaction, she turns to her daughter, who was sitting next to her in the stall, and says, make sure you never barter much when the young ones are alone. They're easier to make more money. To which I said, could you please repeat yourself, but slower? And her face, it was magical. I'd never seen someone so shocked. Her daughter ended up giving me the things for their cost price, and we chatted and hung out quite a bit too. All in all, victories all around. Story 16. I'm white, but I speak Mandarin and Japanese fluently. I've overheard a lot of things. The most memorable was when I went to the Yokohama Chinatown with my Japanese friends. A group of Japanese tourists and a group of Chinese tourists were in an argument, so my friends and I tried to defuse the situation. While we were listening to each side's story in Japanese, there was talk on both sides about me from both groups in their native tongue. So once we finished hearing each other's side's case, I told the Japanese group in Japanese the other side's point of view. Their eyes bulged. Then I told the Chinese group in Mandarin the other side's story. Everyone's eyes bulged, including my friends. I didn't tell them I spoke Mandarin too. Story 17. Apart from English, I natively speak Italian and Slovenian. The first time I brought my girlfriend to Italy to see where I grew up, the main city I showed her was Venice, as I was born there. And there was this one time when we walked all day in the secret passageways of Venice, so we both were naturally tired and a little sweaty. As we hopped on the train, 2 guys besides us started ogling us too and making comments about us. I wish Mussolini was still here. He would show these to speak their own dirty language. Note, my GF doesn't speak Italian, but she does understand a little. Mine bowled up until we stepped off the train as I approached them and loudly said, next time you should probably keep your comments to yourself. The whole car heard me and immediately turned to look at the blushing guy who just replied with a yes. Needless to say, I triumphantly walked off the train while my GF turned around towards the window these guys were sitting at with a big smile stamped on her face. Story 18. I've had a few of these actually. I speak both English and Dari, and you'd be amazed at the places that you see Afghan people at. One time I was at Macy's trying to grab a pair of Levi's 508s, but they didn't have any size in the color. So in the Levi's area, there were 2 women that had the Macy's name tags on that we were speaking to each other. As I got closer, I noticed that it was dark but didn't want to say anything. I came up to them and said, excuse me, but can you check if you have this in this size? And one of the ladies turned to the other and said in Dari, wait a second while I show this idiot we don't have what he wants. I didn't say anything and turns out they did have it in my size, but it was in another spot. Once I grabbed them, I turned to her and said in Dari, "Thank you very much for the help." Her and her friend both turned bright red and asked if I was Afghan and apologized multiple times. In the end, they hooked it up with some secret 40% off code, so it all worked out. Another time I really remember was back when I worked at the Apple Store. This guy came in and clearly spoke very little to no English and was trying to explain an issue with his phone. Since there was no one else with him at the time, I had no idea what other language he spoke and tried to work with him to figure out what the issue was through the broken English and the charades. There was actually nothing wrong with the phone. He wanted multitasking and FaceTime, iOS 4 on it, but he had a first gen iPhone and couldn't get it. Anyways, after about 20 minutes of him telling me why not work and me telling him that his phone is too old, he started to get really frustrated, and a bunch of other guys came in and walked up to him. They asked him what was going on, and he turned around and said, in Dari, of course, "These idiots working here don't even know how to fix their own product," and ranted on a bit about how none of the workers are above a certain age and how we are all spoiled, etc., etc. So after a little bit of his rant, I stopped him and said in Dari, "Well, I have been trying to tell you for the past 20 minutes that your phone is too old and will not work, but apparently you don't understand English. There is nothing wrong with your phone, but there is something wrong with you coming here, not speaking any English, and then getting angry when you don't understand our response." Much redness and apologies ensued. Story 19. I'm bilingual, Dutch, Russian. I live in the Netherlands. I was in St. Petersburg 2 weeks ago. I have a friend who also speaks both Russian and Dutch. We have known each other since we were 2. Our parents are good friends, so they booked flights to Petersburg for the same period. He was staying at his grandma's and I with my grandma. So we were together buying vodka at some supermarket. We're talking Dutch together and English to the cashier just for fun. So all of a sudden I hear girls 18 years old talking. They are star rating us and come to the conclusion that we are quite cute. They guessed our age to be around 19. I give the look to my friend. By some kind of best friend telepathy, we decide that I should make the move. So I turn and say in Russian, "Well, girls, you look quite nice too. We can maybe hang out or something?" They scream and laugh and accept the invitation. We then went to a cafe and after that to the movies. We still occasionally chat with them. Story 20. I've told this story before, but here it goes again. I'm a pretty generic-looking white guy, and I used to live in the Southwest. When the story happened, I had just gotten back from studying abroad in Spain, so my Spanish was, and still is, pretty good. A few of my friends and I, all white dudes, decided to go to Jack in the Box for food one day. We get there, get our food, and eat in a relatively normal fashion. We were one of the few tables in there, and we weren't excessively loud or making a big mess. As we all got up to leave, I heard one of the older Hispanic, in all likelihood Mexican, ladies who worked at the restaurant utter something to the effect of "pinche" in Spanish to another employee. All my other friends had pretty much left the building, but since I was the last one out, I heard her mutter it. It made me mad more than it probably should. Here I was, a white dude trying to learn Spanish when there was no need for me to do so other than me wanting to. If I'm going to take several years of language courses and travel 5,000 miles to a different freaking country to learn Spanish, the least that native speakers can do is not insult me and place me in the white people suck category before talking to me. Some of us do suck pretty hard, but not all of us. I went over to her and motioned for her to come to the counter. I leaned across and said something to the effect of "Cuidado, nunca sabes cuando el punche habla español." Be careful, you never know when a freaking white guy speaks Spanish. Her eyes got really big and her jaw dropped open. She didn't know what to say or do. I just turned and walked out the door. Hopefully she learned her lesson is either now 1, less racist, or 2, more careful about her racism. And if you're enjoying the video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. Mostly related. I've shared this before. My wife and I have adopted 2 kids from China on 2 separate occasions. We had some time to wait before the first one, so we learned some basic Mandarin to help with our trip and connect a bit with our daughter's birth culture. While there, a day or so after we got her, we were in the Walmart, yes, Walmart, in Zhengzhou, when a younger woman walks by, sees a large American guy with a pale red-headed wife carrying a Chinese toddler in a sling, doubles back and with a fake smile says, "Ni bu xuan he ni diao ma ma ma," which works out to, "You don't look like your mom, do you?" My wife spins around and in Mandarin basically says, "Oh yes, she does." The look on that woman's face carried me through the day. Story 22. I've told this before, but I'm conversational in ASL, American Sign Language, and while on the train, 2 rather distinguished gentlemen were having a conversation in ASL. I try not to pay attention, but I see guy 1 sign witch, so I started paying more attention. Apparently, they were two older gay men talking about inappropriate stuff. When they got up to leave, I signed to them, have fun. Their faces were priceless. Story 23. I'm probably a bit too late to get this notice, but I overheard a criminal confession in the back seat of my cab. I even took the perpetrators to the scene of the crime. Well, I picked them both up about a mile away from their destination. It was a young couple. They got in my taxi and the guy gave me the address. Then he asked the girl in Spanish if she was nervous. He told her they would have no time to waste once they were there, and that they would have to lay down the tarp first before doing something. She said, I know that, in Spanish, of course. The guy then said something else about a bucket, but I don't remember that part clearly. And he told her they would need to do a change of clothes because there would be a lot of mess. I looked in my rearview mirror, and though I couldn't see the guy, I saw the girl's face, and she looked downcast and nervous. Her eyes briefly caught mine and said to her BF, I'm sorry, I cannot speak Spanish, but here's my best. Ten cuidado con le cuestistes, tú no sabes quién puede estar estronando. Then he said, in Spanish, don't worry about it, he's one of those freaking Indians. It was silent for the next minute or so because we were approaching their spot, and the guy said, how much is it, boss? And I said, in the frickest, thickest Indian accent I could muster, your toll is $5. The guy turned towards his GF and said, Viste que esta ne entiende, na? The girl smiled in relief, and they went inside. Story 24. I'm Mexican and used to clean houses in the burbs to pay for college. I also speak fluent English. More than a few times, I've been accused of being on something because I clean so well, behind my back, an honest accusation I could stand, called the help. I suppose I was, but the arrogance with which they said it was the issue, and no more than a few details about the pill popping, cheating on their husband, day drinking filth that these ladies call their everyday lives. The crappy thing is that I was just a college girl trying to make an honest way through school, but because I did it cleaning, not summering with rich senators, I'm somehow lower than them. Story 25. Sheesh, the French get a bad rap here. Speaking of which, I was in Krakow, Poland with a few friends, all French, including me. Now, Krakow is an amazing city, but one of our friends, actually a friend of a, well, you get the idea, was born and raised Parisian. I know it's a stereotype, but they do tend to look down on people even by French standards. Anyway, there's 5 of us in the tram standing awkwardly in the middle aisle because all the other seats are taken. We're the only ones standing though, so we attract people's looks to begin with. And for some reason, Paris girl starts rambling about how everyone just looks so depressed and tired here compared to Paris, which wasn't true at all, and considering our steady diet of just vodka while we were here, we were certainly the most zombie looking of the bunch. After a while, I say, Paris girl, tune it down, who are you to say that? What, they can't understand it anyway? Like, heck they can, how would you know? And just because they can't understand doesn't mean you get to insult them, geez. By now, I could see a few frowns in our direction, probably from how loud we were. Anyway, Paris girl stops for a bit and all of a sudden starts again with a massive, loud, and clear, they're all ugly anyway. At this moment, 2 friends of mine and I, all at the same time, screamed variations of, shut the heck up for the love of God. She did. And I swear that when we got out of the tram, a younger guy sitting looked at me, nodded in approval, and mouthed mercy to me. Story 26. Although I'm Mexican, Spanish was never that easy to learn. My white friend, who I worked with, actually caught on to me a lot faster than I did. A pair of Mexicans, mother and son, worked for us as well. We always wondered how much bad crap they would say about us. One day, my white friend is trying to learn more Spanish from a new Mexican that just started working there. When my friend walked away, he noticed that the mother had walked over to the new guy. My buddy decided to nonchalantly mosey his way back over just in time to hear the mom say something along the lines of, don't teach them any Spanish, we don't want them to know when we are talking crap about them. Well, I kinda liked them up until that point. Story 27. Not me, but I have a story to share. When I was in middle school, there was a group of kids, like 3 or 4 of them, who would sit in the back of class and speak in Creole, chatting and laughing, but nobody could understand what they said. The teacher would tell them to stop speaking in Creole since she couldn't know if they were saying something offensive, which was usually met with saying something to each other in an obviously mocking manner and then the whole group breaking out in laughter. So one day, this guy shows up in the class. He says that he's training to be a teacher and he's going to be shadowing the class that day. So he's sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, jotting things down in a notebook. Of course, the Creole speaking kids were chatting away as usual. So the guy gets up out of the chair and walks over to this group of Creole speaking kids who all sat nearby me so I could hear them pretty clearly. The guy leans over to them and very calmly says, in plain English, "Yes, my thing is huge, and no, your hot teacher ain't gonna do you. By the way, I'm your new English teacher, and y'all got detention." They never spoke Creole in class again. Story 28. I'm Polish American, born and raised in NYC. I speak Polish fluently, it was my first language. But people always naturally assume I'm American. I don't look very Polish, it seems. I was once donating red liquid. I was sitting in the waiting room at the New York Center with 3 teenagers, students from a local high school. This high school is exclusively for international students. 2 of the teens were rapidly speaking Polish to one another. I didn't let on that I could understand them. One said to the other, "Well, if he says that to you, you can tell him from me that he can kiss my bum." I couldn't help but laugh and betray myself. They were actually amused to find out that I was listening the entire time. Story 29. I speak Portuguese. I went into a salon a few months ago to get my hair done, but I went in speaking English. So I sat down, started doing my hair. I was the only one there. Another lady walks in, speaking English, and 2 girls working there start talking in Portuguese, saying the lady's hair that walked in was hideous, that they would have a lot of work to do. I went up to the lady that walked in and told her what was being said. She left. At that point, my hair was damp since I was getting a blow dry. I get up, talk to the manager in Portuguese, and leave. I got a call in a few hours from the owner since I was a client there, apologizing, saying it won't happen again. She also told me she fired the 2 girls. I haven't been back, but I know she hasn't fired them. Story 30. In a reversal of the French are rude stereotype, I was in a grocery store in France and 2 college-age American girls were walking around and talking to each other in English about the other customers, sometimes saying really rude things. When we were in the same aisle, one of them started talking about me just a few feet away, just about how I'm really tall, which doesn't offend me since it's true. And when I looked over at them, the other one got nervous and told her friend to be quiet, but the friend replied, "Oh, it's okay, she can't understand us." There was no satisfying confrontation here, I'm afraid. I was just so shocked at how rude they were being that I didn't say anything and I just walked away. It's true there weren't many English speakers in that town, but still, it's English. You should always assume there's going to be someone around who can understand you. Story 31. I'm not bilingual, but my dad and his brothers are. They speak Hungarian, which is not very commonly spoken in America. Well, anyways, he told me a story that happened about 15 years ago. His brothers and him were in an elevator when a very obese, putrid-smelling woman steps into the elevator. So my dad and his brothers started talking about her and how disgusting she was in a Hungarian because they were not expecting that she would know it. Well, when they got to their floor and got off, before the doors closed, the woman turned to them and essentially said, "You should really find out if the person you're talking about speaks the language, schmucks." Yikes, I bet that elevator ride felt like an eternity. Story 32. I was buying my house. I was at my lawyer's office in a meeting with the seller and his lawyer. The seller had been weirdly difficult to close. He only spoke Spanish. I purposely never spoke Spanish around him or his lawyer, and my lawyer only spoke English to me. When my lawyer stepped out of the room to go make copies, the other dude and his lawyer started discussing all kinds of stuff about the deal in Spanish. I understood everything and used this to close the deal right then and there. They look embarrassed as all heck. I normally don't like to embarrass people, but I find that switching languages so you can speak in front of people without them understanding is really freaking rude. So they deserve what they got. Never assume people can understand you. I also maintain my ignorant white guy approach to the language most of the time when meeting new people and so on, so that I can use my language skills to my advantage. I'd usually rather they see me as an ignorant foreigner than someone who's lived here a long time and understands everything. Story 33. Grocery store line. I just happened to pick a line where the cashier was challenged. He clearly had issues. Carefully and diligently, he did his job as 2 Hispanic women, possibly in their 20s, got in line behind me. Apparently, the line wasn't moving fast enough, so they started mocking and talking in Spanish, giggling because they think nobody can understand what they're saying. I know just enough Spanish to get me into trouble. Then I heard, "Mira ese." Look at that. I couldn't help it then. I turned and said in Spanish, "You better shut up because you never know who's listening," and after that, they didn't say another Spanish word. Story 34. This will probably be buried, but what the heck. I'm Irish, and in Ireland, it is mandatory to learn the native language from elementary school to the end of high school. You also take a foreign language, French in my case. Anyway, in the sixth grade, I was generally more proficient at Irish than would be expected of a child at that age. One day, I overheard the teachers making comments about several students as gaelege. Pretty rude stuff, to be frank, mostly about the kids' parents and their work and such. I turned around and politely informed them that they probably shouldn't talk about their students like that, after which they went sheet white. They apologized and asked me not to tell anyone else about what I had heard. Of course, I told everyone. Story 35. I was in Monaco on a school trip for my French class with some California students. We were ordering food at small local places when the California students in front of me were trying to order in English only. They were pretty rude and demanding, saying things like, "Oh my god, I just want some ice. Ugh, these people are so dumb." And the French cook was just looking confused, and after a lot of bickering, the California students walked off. Then when I went to order, I tried to order in French. Not very good, but after 6 years of studying French in high school and elementary school, I think I said, "Puis-je dit," when the cook cut me off and went, "Dude, I speak English. Those girls were just schmucks. What would you like?" I thought it was awesome. Story 36. I'm half Latino and look very much Caucasian. These anecdotes outline the reverse problem, so not sure if applicable. When I lived in the PNW, I was home in the middle of the day one time and I met my postal worker. She told me that she deduced who I was because my last name wasn't Martinez or whatever and you speak English. I immediately started speaking to her in Spanish. Her reply was, "Oh, there I go, racial profiling again." I also get why people confiding me in all sorts of racist commentary all the time. They don't know that I speak Spanish, so I guess I wasn't supposed to hear those comments either. Then, of course, there are the very obvious Latino people who find out I am Latino and decide to start speaking in Spanish to me about how much both white and black people annoy them. Not sure I was supposed to hear that either. What you realize quickly when you are a multicultural person is that there are people of every color, nationality, culture, etc. who are schmucks. Story 37. I work at a Best Buy in Texas selling computers and cameras. My parents are from Trinidad, so I have their darker skin and tan easily. I also look Hispanic in the summer. My family lived in Quebec for a while, so I speak fairly fluent French. I was helping out a French couple in the camera department, and after every question, they would look at each other and talk in French. The wife kept telling the husband to find someone else to talk to because this teenager doesn't know anything. I'm 20, but I look like I'm 16, but I'm studying computer engineering with a minor in photography, so I know what I'm talking about, definitely more than any of my coworkers. After about 40 minutes of questions, they decide to get a Canon T5i. I check them out, and they ask me if I can get someone to help them set up their new camera. I offer to help, and the wife turns to her husband and in French says, "He doesn't know what he's doing. He'll break it. Go ask someone else for me." In French, I tell her, "I know this camera pretty well, but I'll go get my boss for you." The look on her face made my day. She looked embarrassed and ashamed at the same time. Story 38. My late father was a very, very big man. I'm slightly larger than the average bear. In 1995, we went to Costa Rica. There was a line of taxis outside our hotel on a side street. 3 or 4 were in front of the hotel and another handful parked on the opposite shoulder. My dad got in the front seat and I got in behind the driver. My normal-sized sister and mom were on the other side. It was hot out, February in Alajuela, and they all had their windows down. Our taxi driver, assuming that it was just another yells in Spanish, "I'm going to charge these ones by the kilogram instead of the kilometers on the meter." Having lived abroad extensively, I am fluent in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, but I'm as Anglo-Saxon looking as you can get. Fair skin, cobalt blue eyes, massive beard, a foot taller than most everyone in Costa Rica. I know when a Spanish speaker is innocently and culturally acceptably talking about how big I am, and I recognize when they are mocking or making fun of me. This one was the latter. I reached up, put my hand on his shoulder, pulled him back towards me, and icily whispered in his ear, in Spanish, "Look here, little man, you're going to turn on the meter at once, or I'm going to write down your taxi license number, and the next call I make will be to the DMV so they can take it away from you immediately. You got me, dude?" He turned as pale as someone can and apologized profusely. When I translated for my family, my dad started laughing like mad, looked at the dude, and said, in Spanish, "My son speaks well, huh?" I almost felt sorry for the guy because it's not a bad joke, but I'm guessing he was a bit more careful from then on out. Story 39. I attend the University of New Mexico. It's full of Brazilians. They like to gather in large groups at the SRC Commons. As we all know, Brazilians tend to be energetic and rather loud. Being of Brazilian birth myself, I speak fluent Portuguese. I love eavesdropping. I regularly go to the Commons, buy a slice of pizza, and sit down to listen to the conversation. One time, a group got a little suspicious. The conversation turned into something like this. Girl 1, "Hey, do you think that boy there speaks Portuguese? He's just been sitting there. I was at an adjacent table redditing on his phone this whole time." Girl 2, "He's kind of cute, you know?" I still don't know if she meant it or if it was said merely to try to get my attention. Girl 1, "Yeah, but he'd be cuter if he cut his hair." Girl 2, "At least he ties it back." Girl 3, "And it's clean. You must bathe." Guys 1 to 3, restraining laughter. I didn't respond at all, didn't give any indication that I might understand they were talking about me, whether I could understand the words or not. I'd make a crappy eavesdropper if I did. Story 40. I'm a Mexican living in Southern California, but I go to a high school that is absent of any Latinos, and I myself look white. I play soccer for one school's team, and sometimes we go and play schools from very Latino areas. Usually, these predominantly Latino teams speak to each other in Spanish, giving themselves a slight advantage because others don't know what they're saying. They also take advantage to say mean things about the players on the other team. So one game, I was playing a very vocal team, and they were yelling tactics at each other that I could clearly understand. Very soon after, I would yell at my team, saying exactly what they were planning to do. They were dumbfounded and had no idea how I was figuring out what they were saying. You see, they speak in a very distinct slang that a guy that looks the way I do has no chance of understanding. Thankfully, my parents take me on trips to Mexico all the time, and my Spanish is very, very fluent because they make me speak at home with them. So eventually they caught on that I could understand what they were saying, and next to me they were commenting on how crazy it was that I was deciphering everything they were telling each other, and then a flurry of insults came my way. At this point, I turned to them and gave them some cheek back in an accent arguably better than theirs. Their faces? Priceless. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.